So welcome to this webinar on turning ADHD into your superpower. Today is all about telling you what a wonderful thing ADHD is, as long as you can handle it. So let's see why you're here first. So you're probably here today because you think you may have ADHD, adult ADHD that is, or you already know you have it because you've been diagnosed with the condition, so to say. Maybe someone you love and or live with has ADHD, or maybe you're a therapist or a coach helping people with ADHD and you want to know more about it. So in whichever one of these categories you fall into, you're in the right place today. So before we begin, I'll tell you a bit about my story first. I had a corporate life before I became a therapist, and I had it all on the outside. I had a great salary. I was living in central London, and some people would even tell me I was living the dream. But I wasn't happy on the inside. I didn't feel that I had any meaning. You see, I grew up as a very, very quiet kid. In fact, I probably would have been diagnosed with some anxiety or depression, maybe even ADHD growing up. But you see, where I come from, mental health wasn't really a priority, wasn't a thing. People didn't know about all these conditions back then. And when it came to college and university for me, I went for the safe bet. I went on to study economics, even though my first choices when I was thinking about what profession I wanted to do was being a psychiatrist, firstly, and secondly, a film director. So what does economics have to do with either of those? I have no idea. But the truth is that I was looking for some safety. I was ruled by a lot of fears in my childhood, and I was looking for some safety, for something that will give me a way to have a safe life, a safe income as well. And so I studied economics, and after that, I went on to pursue a career in IT, first in accounting, and then I transferred into IT. And when I found myself living in London 7 years after I started working, as I said, I had everything on the outside, but I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't satisfied with my life. And then I also had a year of intense stress. I mean, in professionally speaking, I could say I was bored, which is what you hear a lot of people with ADHD say, that they were bored. I finally had gone down from having a very, very busy consulting life to having a very easy job at Shell Corporation in London. At the same time, I had a very unhealthy relationship, which lasted for about a year. And then the following year, after it went all down, it was a very, very stressful year for me. And at the end of that year, I was not able to function or work or do anything really, or even make simple decisions. So that's what led to me seeking a diagnosis that actually a friend of mine suggested I may have ADHD. And also I went to my GP and I was diagnosed with anxiety. I was given sertraline, and also, as my friend suggested, I may have ADHD. I went to see a specialist, although I thought I was the best student in my school. How is that even possible that I have ADHD? But I was willing to try anything, so I did get the diagnosis. And within a few days, my life was transformed. I thought I found the answer. I started taking Ritalin. Actually, I started taking Elvans, which is a long-lasting form of Ritalin, as you see later in the presentation. And I was also put on the anti-anxiety medication or sertraline, and also on diazepam because I had some panic attacks as well. So all of this really did change something. For a while, everything was perfect. I found myself medicated in the full range of modern day medication, and I got a new job, I got a salary increase, and everything was better for a while, until one day I found myself thinking, I don't want to be on this life support for the rest of my life. I was willing to try anything. I didn't want to have to take all these pills to be on which I call life support, just to be able to work for somebody else. And I still wasn't happy. I still didn't find any meaning in what I was doing, in the work that I was doing. And as it happens, when you really connect and when you ask a question, the universe gives you the answer. So at that time, I found a practitioner who is not only a psychologist, but also an EFT practitioner. He was psychiatrist, psychologist, EFT practitioner, all of it together. And through him, I found emotional freedom technique, or EFT. And later on, I found other alternative methods to healing, which helped me resolve long-held trauma and even lessen a lot of the ADHD symptoms. And as you'll see throughout today, ADHD boils down to traumatic experiences in childhood, as many other things often do, and many other diagnoses often do. It's all about trauma and the trauma symptoms. And in fact, as one of my favorite books, The Body Keeps a Score, says, what you're diagnosed with, PTSD, ADHD, other so-called disorders, largely depends on this main presenting symptoms. But what lies underneath all of those things is the childhood trauma. Typically, people with ADHD, typically, I say, have not been severely abused, but they have grown up in a state of confusion, a very messy, disorganized family environment. So before we go into that, let's mention something about being in the flow. Being in the flow is something that a lot of people ask me about ADHD, about that hyperfocus. Hyperfocus, or being in the flow, being in the zone, is being so absorbed that you forget about everything around you. And that's another thing that we, as people with ADHD, have. Of course, everybody has it to one extent or another, but we have it a lot more than other people. So it's something, so that's already the first benefit of ADHD, when you find yourself in the flow, but that only happens when you do something that you really, really enjoy. And so here's the truth. In my opinion, ADHD is nothing but genius in disguise. You just have to heal the disguise to let genius come out, heal the trauma to let the genius come out. Heal the symptoms to let the genius come out. Because people with ADHD are highly creative, highly intelligent, and they absolutely are fantastic at what they do once they find what it is that they love doing. In fact, many, many famous people have ADHD, or would have been diagnosed with ADHD had it been available, so to speak, at a time as a diagnosis. That includes Thomas Edison, Sir Richard Branson. He actually was officially diagnosed as a child with ADHD. Justin Timberlake, I think the same case. President Lincoln, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Scott Fitzgerald, all these people have been set, either have been diagnosed officially or have been set to have ADHD. Why? Because they have this tendency to hyper focus on what they love doing. And some of them are actually very, very good at multitasking and doing different things. So Richard Branson has multiple businesses, Leonardo da Vinci as well, doing multiple things, very good at multiple things. And that is a main feature, so to speak, or benefit of ADHD, that we can multitask, we can focus on many different things as well. So it really depends on the personality as well. So what is ADHD according to its official medical definition? And what are the bad symptoms that we need to, so-called the negative symptoms that we need to heal, so that we become people like these guys here. And actually, before I go into negative symptoms, let me give you some food for thought. What is the difference between people who suffer with ADHD and people who become famous inventors, painters, presidents even, and so on? The difference is that it's again the family environment and the environment they grew up in. These people being incredibly creative, incredibly capable, and being encouraged to channel that creativity into something great creates people who are business people, creative salespeople, inventors, and so on and so forth. People who've been put down for being hyperactive, who've been put down for being all over the place, bouncing off the walls, they develop anxiety, depression, and so on. And as I always say, the problem isn't the ADHD, isn't the creativity, the distractibility, the not wanting to sit still and not wanting to focus on something that's boring. Because quite frankly, why would you want to focus on something that's boring rather than focus on what you're good at and what you love doing? The real problem here is, guys, is the anxiety and ADHD, OCD, and all the other conditions that accompany it that actually are a symptom of trauma, a symptom that something has gone wrong, that you haven't been allowed to express yourself. And as I like saying, anxiety, for example, is not being yourself. So the difference between people who become famous people with ADHD and successful people with ADHD and people who suffer and seek a diagnosis, the difference is exactly that, is that self-confidence, self-esteem, and knowing that, okay, well, yes, maybe I lose track of what I do and maybe I'm distracted, but I have systems in place to help me do that, versus beating yourself up for things that, for careless mistakes, for lacking attention to do the boring things. So let's look at the symptoms. There are two types, inattentive and hyperactivity, impulsivity, and then there's also combined ADHD. So let's look at this in turn. Inattention, people who are inattentive usually have difficulty of sustaining attention, making mistakes, poor organizational skills, losing things necessary for tasks, for activities, easily distracted, forgetful in daily activities, and also don't really have difficulty following through on instructions and tasks. And the theory here is that the prefrontal cortex fails to develop properly. The prefrontal cortex that is responsible for executive decision-making, for executive functioning, such as prioritizing, decision-making, attention in general, fails to develop. And the reason for that is stress. Stress during pregnancy. So the prefrontal cortex obviously develops during pregnancy and is the last part developed. So stress in the last months is really, really important and is highly correlated with ADHD as well. Very similar with hyperactivity and impulsivity. People with hyperactivity leave seats in situations when they should remain seated. They experience restlessness, have difficulty being quiet, basically always on the go or driven by motor, talking excessively, blurting out inappropriate answers, not waiting their turn. So again, that prefrontal cortex that acts as a filter to our emotions has not developed properly. And also, as we'll see later, stress, once again, stress in early childhood, just like in PTSD, just like in trauma, it makes the amygdala or the limbic system, essentially the part of the limbic system that responds to stress. So when we grow up in an environment which stresses out, which doesn't make sense, we are then hypersensitive to potentially stressful stimuli, to criticism, to rejection, to abandonment. Again, rejection sensitivity very often goes with ADHD. People with ADHD are very sensitive to rejection, a very high sense of justice. So that's not in DSM, but that is my observation from working with, from my own life, as well as talking to and working with people with ADHD. Very, very acute sense of justice, very, very highly sensitive people. And we also often see things that other people miss out. So that's the gift, because we are attuned to kind of being on the lookout for these small signals of things going wrong, because we need to respond to that. We see things that other people very often don't see. So do we need a diagnosis? A diagnosis can help to make sense of your life. However, it is not helpful to identify with it. It helps to move beyond the diagnosis. When I first got the ADHD diagnosis, completely changed my life. It just explained every impulsive decision. It explained the lack of kind of being distractible, forgetfulness, all these things. It explained all these things, and my life finally made sense. However, I very quickly realized that it wasn't helpful to identify with it, and you see it as something that is good, and you move beyond it. But how do you move beyond it? You need to heal the disguise to let the genius come out. This is what I genuinely, wholeheartedly believe. The more you heal, the better your life becomes. The more you heal, the more you lessen the symptoms, and you let your true creativity, intelligence, and genius genuinely come out. So this is what you need to do. So let's look at the main pillars to solving ADHD. First of all, you need to heal the trauma. Secondly, you have to adopt coaching practices or just adopt systems in place to manage that distractibility and forgetfulness. For example, I have my Google Calendar and I put down there all my appointments, otherwise they will likely be forgotten. I also have an assistant, which has been absolutely changed my life, and everything that I don't have the patience for, I outsource to her. Medication. What about medication? Medication can be used as a temporary crutch. I'm not against medication. I'm also not a medical practitioner. So if you are on medication and if you're watching this, do not go ahead and get off it. Do talk to someone first, to a medical professional. But in my opinion, in my view, medication should be temporary. And finally, the triple S, sustenance, sleep, supplements to improve brain function. Sleep actually should have been put here first because it's so important for ADHD. In fact, one day of sleep can massively impact you, and chronic lack of sleep can really impact your brain function. Sustenance, or what you eat, we'll look into that a little bit later, is really important as well. And it can create more brain fog, or it can create better brain function, better concentration, better attention as well. Same for supplements. We'll look at a few supplements that are helpful. They can really help improve brain function. And ultimately, through healing, we lower cortisol and we increase serotonin and dopamine, which is crucial for ADHD, crucial for attention. This is the main thing. So heal the trauma and let the genius come out. Let your creative brain really come out. What about medication? So stimulant medication, we have different types. I haven't listed everything here, but some long-lasting ones that most people take, especially in the UK, Elvance, Concerta. There's also Strattera, which is non-stimulant based, and it's recommended for some people, but I hear that gives negative side effects as well. So Ritalin is the kind of traditional that everybody knows. So we have short and long-lasting Ritalin, Adderall. There are many different brand names. Most of them are stimulant-based medication. However, some people report that while medication do make you more focused, you may also focus on the wrong thing. So in a way, medication helps, but it doesn't really solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't make the trauma go away. So let's see how you turn ADHD and anxiety into an advantage. As I said, it is actually all about anxiety, accompanying anxiety. And before we do that, where does it all come from? So where does the ADHD where do the ADHD symptoms come from? I already touched on this briefly. Many people with ADHD have gone through abuse, adoption, neglect, or witnessed arguments or violence in the family, have gone through early age loss or divorce. So many different family situations, family environments. However, the main thing is the world didn't make sense. The brain became confused. Also, people started escaping either to the head or in the outer world, bouncing off the walls, but you cannot sit still because it is too stressful, too painful. It doesn't make any sense. So your body is firing neurotransmitters all over the place. It doesn't make sense. You cannot sit still. It's confusion. So experience constant stress, our bodies did not heal and our brains did not develop properly. As mentioned, that can also have its roots in pregnancy as well. So there's already a correlation. There's already a tendency from before birth for ADHD. And then, of course, the environment contributes. And of course, stress during pregnancy would be correlated with stress in early childhood, or not necessarily. So again, there's something very important to mention here. ADHD is said to have a genetic predisposition, and then it does or does not develop in the developmental formative years. And that's the case with everything else. Studies with rats have shown that someone who is predisposed to being stressed or kind of or aggressive, or whatever it may be, which is placed in the right environment, will trait will be suppressed, will not be exhibited in that person, or well, in the case of the rat status, in that baby rat, and vice versa. Someone who has healthy genes put in a stressful environment will develop the conditions and will then pass it on to generations. So will act in the same way with the next generation, with their own babies, will act in a way that is not healthy. So the environment plays a major role. It's all discussed in epigenetics. We won't go into details of that. But even if you have the genetic predisposition for ADHD, as is the case for other conditions as well, they either get developed or not based on the environment that we grow up in. That is the main thing. So what is the result? As already mentioned, people with ADHD are highly sensitive. Sorry, just going back here briefly. And again, even though the first formative years are so important, all of this can change. Our brains are developing constantly. So the good news is, if you're listening to this, if you have ADHD or live with someone with ADHD, our brains are developing constantly. So through healing and through the right physical environment as well, through the right nutrition, supplements, these symptoms can and will get better. Our brains are developing, our neurochemicals can be changed, our neurochemistry can be changed, as is the case with every other condition as well. So yes, it has to do with brain chemistry. I'm not going to deny this, but it can be changed. And the more you heal, the more you do what is good for you, the better and faster that change will be. It also does get automatically better with age, as we mature, as we have experience. However, there is something with ADHD that we don't learn from experience very easily. There's a little bit of a childlike demeanor around people with ADHD, that they don't learn from experience very easily and tend to repeat the same mistakes. Again, that does get better with age, but of course, that process is much faster through healing. So what's the result? People with ADHD are highly sensitive. They have difficulty trusting others. They have difficulty keeping up with appointments. So they get in trouble. Many people with ADHD have difficulty keeping a job because they forget appointments, they forget important deadlines, and so on. Lying or sensitivity to being lied to and kind of extreme honesty is also something very typical with people with ADHD. Either easily controlled or tendency to control others, or both in the same individual, is also very common. Again, it's about feeling out of control growing up and wanting to overcompensate. So sometimes you would be easily controlled by people who can do that. And at other times you would have a tendency and one desire to control other people. Again, people with ADHD can be very ego-driven. They have a need to be right, almost coming across very selfish, actually. They do have a huge sense of justice and a huge empathy, but because that child that didn't have enough attention growing up, and as Dr. Gabor Mate says, attention deficit disorder stands for attention deficit. So there wasn't enough attention as we were growing up, and therefore the desire, that need to have attention is still there and continues into adulthood. So kind of it's like sometimes it's like talking to a child. That child comes through, and yes, it's the same as with as with a lot of other conditions as well. But again, it's a sensitivity and it's a distractibility that defining symptoms here, in my opinion. So what's the solution? Again, heal the child and the mature adult will appear. I promise you that. Gaining understanding from your partner, family, and relatives is crucial. So if you have ADHD, I recommend using it as a framing, as framing the context. So explaining why you're late, why you forgot, and so on, but not using it as an excuse. There's a thin line, and please don't use it as an excuse, because you have to understand them. You have to understand your partner, family, friends as well, that it's not easy to always be to always be kind of dealing with this sort of behavior where people where to always be dealing with this sort of behavior where somebody forgets the appointment, forgets to show up, and so on and so forth. So it's understanding from both sides. Very, very, very important, understanding from both sides. And I cannot emphasize this enough, to not use it as an excuse, but just to frame the context. Take responsibility for your own healing. I always say it's not your fault what happened to you, but it is your responsibility to heal. So what are techniques that can help? Traditional therapy to raise self-awareness. Again, I believe in traditional therapy in its use to raise self-awareness, but it doesn't necessarily fix the problem very often. So many people start with traditional therapy, talking therapy. They start to understand themselves. This is my case as well. This is how I started, until I wanted to actually fix the problem, until I wanted to do some deeper work. That's when I came across RTT, rapid transformational therapy, and emotional freedom technique. So these two techniques, as well as hypnotherapy, can be very, very useful for understanding. And understanding is power, and changing things on a subconscious level is even more powerful, because that's when that's where it all resides. Our habits and our beliefs reside in a subconscious and in our subconscious. Emotional freedom technique actually sits between body awareness and sort of hypnotherapy for me, because you go into a bit of a trance as you tap, you release the negative emotions, but also it has to do with the body. It has to do with tapping on certain meridian points. If you're interested in any of these techniques, I'll be very happy to explain more. So please reach out to me, and I'll explain about all of these techniques and how they work and how they can be helpful. Body awareness and breathing, as well as meditation and yoga, can be really, really helpful as well. They have been shown to be helpful with trauma in general. Same thing with ADHD, breathing, body awareness, meditation, yoga, just reconnecting with your body, because when we escape to the head, we actually escape from the body as well. We have actually escaped and often disconnected from the body, because again, the environment didn't make sense. So we started disconnecting. And again, as with any trauma, many people with ADHD have poor self-esteem, have an inflated sense of ego, as already mentioned, craving attention very often, or shying away from attention. So it can go both ways, and can have a lot of shame or guilt from past mistakes. So that's kind of more the learned behavior. So because they constantly forget things, because they screw up, so to say, people accumulate shame, guilt from past mistakes or the impulsive decisions. So again, we developed anxiety, depression, mood disorders, or mood swings. And that's how people usually start to seek a diagnosis, because they start suffering from the shame, the guilt, from the mistakes they have made. So let's go into the physical bit a little bit, and the sustenance bit. The foods to avoid when it comes to ADHD is anything really high in sugar, but also inflammatory foods such as tomatoes, also oranges, eggs, beans, wheat, soy, chocolate, milk. So all these foods are not great and not good for, they can cause more brain fog rather than clarify the executive functioning, rather than bring more clarity. So these are foods to avoid when it comes to ADHD. Let's talk about supplements a little bit, because that's something that one can easily do, can easily add to your daily life if you have ADHD. Omega-3 fatty acids, this is something that has been researched very well. It has been known for a long time, and it's something that really, really helps with ADHD. They do take time to accumulate and to start working, but it's very, very helpful. Vitamin D, many children with ADHD have been found to be also deficient in vitamin D. I mean, all of these things, to be honest, can help anyone, not just if you have ADHD. However, they are particularly helpful if you have ADHD. Zinc, iron, magnesium, these three things have personally changed my life. Magnesium definitely helps people with ADHD calm down. Zinc taken before bedtime especially can help better sleep. And as I said earlier, sleep is absolutely major and crucial for ADHD. Ginkgo biloba and ginseng, these are supplements that can improve brain function, clarity, as well, and reduce the brain fog that people with ADHD experience. St. John's wort, 5-HTP, SAMI, these are more towards kind of healing anxiety and depression. 5-HTP is also produced from tryptophan. So tryptophan is an essential amino acid found in foods. So again, certain foods will help ADHD as well. So foods that contain these amino acids, vitamin B complex as well. St. John's wort has a exclamation mark there because that has to be taken, that interacts with other medications. So you have to be careful and you have to do some research as to what it can be taken with and what it shouldn't be taken with. It, generally speaking, should be taken on its own. SAMI has some controversy as well around it, so make sure to do your own research, consult your physician. 5-HTP also interacts with antidepressants. So again, if you are on any medication at all, before you take any of these supplements, please consult your physician and make sure that they're allowed, that there won't be any interaction. I have clients who have taken even over-the-counter cold medicine, and it has interacted with their ADHD medication or with their antidepressant medication, and it can lead to a really bad experience. Again, a vitamin B complex, helpful for everyone, but also shown to improve ADHD symptoms. So this is all for me for today, and I'm really grateful for having you here. And again, if you want to reach out to me, if you want to discuss anything that has to do with ADHD, if you want more tips and advice, please feel free to reach out, and I will be glad to help. You can see my contact details on the slide, and I'll be happy to hear from you. Thank you.